Okay, we are live. Thank you everyone for joining. We've got lots to cover, so let's get started. A few bits of housekeeping first. This event is being recorded so we can share the recording with everyone after. If you have comments or questions throughout, please just pop them in the comment section. We'll get them all at the end. The wonderful Kamm is going to chat to us for about 45 minutes, and then we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. Kamm is the founder at the Team Space. She's a leadership and growth outcomes coach. She works with organizations of all sizes to help leaders, teams, and individuals create the space they need to improve the way they work together and develop new ways of working. She's going to talk to us today about how to have those difficult conversations to achieve productive outcomes. I can't wait. We all know we often avoid difficult conversations, right? But we know when we do have them, the benefits and the outcomes are huge. So how do we get more comfortable in the discomfort? I'm going to hand it over to Kamm to tell us more.
Thank you, Jo. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to join you this morning on the wonderful Striven platform, and thanks to Laura for inviting me on to talk about this topic that I think is very, very important, probably more than ever. And there are reasons for that, which, just look around the world and look at all the difficult conversations that actually don't take place and then what happens as a result. I wanted to just kick off because I think this really sort of places this conversation in a leadership context. And this is from the wonderful Brene Brown. Daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about hard things. And I think it's just important to put this whole conversation in the context of leadership and performance. I wanted to start this morning with a little bit of an anecdote from the weekend, which is from my beautiful 12-year-old son, Jimmy. On the weekend, we were doing a drop-off at Savers. We're moving house, so we're having a big clear out. And we were also there to try and help him construct his Halloween costume. Out the front of our particular local Savers, there was a gentleman, asking for money. And I've brought my kids up to always acknowledge people like that, to not walk past them, not treat them as though they're invisible, always to say hello and how are you. And, we very often do give people money in that situation. At that minute, I was running around, I was stressed, I was kind of like, let's keep going. We didn't have any cash on us. And then we walked past him again on the way out, and we got in the car and I said to Jimmy, have you got any coins in your bag? And he did. And then I got really flustered because we'd already walked past him. I felt really uncomfortable that we hadn't given him any money. And I was sort of, basically going to do a runner. I'm quite ashamed to say. And Jimmy said to me, Mum, I think his homelessness is more important than your awkwardness. And, it just hit me right between the eyes that, my 12-year-old held me to account. But to me, that is the essence of what we talk about when we avoid difficult conversations, is that what we're doing when we do that is we're actually placing our own comfort ahead of what's important or right. So let's get into it. I think, as I said, there's a really important context around difficult conversations. And I'm hoping that today gives you some really practical tools so that you can walk out of here or head into your next team situation and be able to grapple with those difficult situations. So I think this is very much about the fact that we live in an increasingly complex and difficult world. We're faced with some incredibly tough adaptive challenges. And unless we can grapple with difficult situations, we are simply not going to be able to solve some of those really complex problems. We need to be able to do hard things. We need to be able to give feedback, and receive feedback. We need to be able to challenge the status quo. Part of that is so that we can innovate, so that we can solve problems. But the other part of it is around the feedback conversation, which is that, our people are demanding development. They are demanding feedback, and we need to be able to do it in a way that's constructive. So let's get into what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about this whole idea of thinking and feeling and why it's very important in the context of when you prepare for a difficult conversation. I'll take you through a quick check-in process that I call the 4-state self-check, or the 4-state check-in. We'll use that to think about what happens for us when we think about difficult conversations, and then we'll think about how we reframe that. I then want to take you through some really, really simple language tweaks that help to increase receptivity when you are having those conversations. And then at the end, I'm just going to really sort of try and hone the importance of preparing and checking in with your own intentions in those moments. So I'm going to ask you to put some things in the chat. I want you to just first of all have a think about the word difficult. Like, when you think something's difficult, can you put in the chat for me, what sort of thoughts come to mind? Perhaps you might have a physical response to that. I'm keen to know what comes up for people when you think of the word difficult. I'm going to offer up some of my own to get started. When I think about something being difficult, I get a bit of a feeling of like, exhaustion, or depending on what it is that's difficult, my heart might race, or, yesterday, on the weekend, in that anecdote that I was sharing at the start, I was flustered. It was hard. I was having to, grapple with something inside of myself that was causing me the desire to kind of avoid the situation. Tired. Thanks, Andrea. Yep, tired. Absolutely. Uncomfortable. Thank you, Claire. Yep. Hard to achieve. Yes. Yep. Thank you. Awkward. It's such a great word in this context. So I want to move now to thinking about specifically the sorts of conversations, those sorts of difficult conversations that we tend to avoid. So if you can pop in the chat what you think those sorts of conversations are that perhaps you may have avoided in the past, or people have avoided with you, or in organisations where you've seen perhaps leaders that haven't dealt with situations where they've actually not dealt with things, and then what's happened as a result of that. So any of those sorts of conversations. So I'm thinking feedback, I'm thinking behavioural things that go unchecked. Any of those sorts of conversations that you come into contact with in an organisational setting that perhaps you try and avoid. If you can pop some of those in the chat, that would be fantastic. Yep, they're confronting for yourself. Exactly. Thanks, Catherine. That is definitely a reason why we avoid things. Yep, there's an interpersonal risk. Yeah, possibility for disagreement. Indeed. It's that, fear of confrontation. Thank you. That is certainly the gist of confronting the truth. Interesting. Thank you, Murray. Yeah. Depending on what that truth is, which, as we know, is someone's perceptions versus another. Performance. Okay, so we avoid some of these conversations because we're worried about the impact on performance. Yep, we're worried about people's reactions. That's right. Okay, so the reason fundamentally that we avoid some of these conversations is because we, as fundamentally still primal beings, that part of our brain is still very powerful. We're in constant threat detection mode. So when we're faced with the idea of discomfort or making someone uncomfortable, or the threat of potential confrontation, there's something that happens in our bodies, and we go into this threat detection mode. And as most of you will have come into contact with, this notion of fight or flight. So it happens in ourselves, and then it can also, depending on the way we communicate with other people, we can actually create that in others. So one way of really getting in touch with that part of ourself is this process called the 4-state self-check, or the 4-state check-in. So I'm just going to get you to write down 4 words. They're going to come onto the screen in a moment, but I just want to, put some scaffolding around this, which is around this idea that, pretty much everything in life is better with a healthy dose of self-awareness. And unfortunately, we don't all have high degrees of self-awareness, but you can cultivate it. And I think it's a lifelong journey that we just keep building our own self-awareness the further we go through life. So the 4-stage self-check-in is about understanding what's going on for you on 4 different levels in any given moment. So those 4 different levels are the physiological level. So I talked before about a racing heart or sweaty palms or a dry mouth, or speaking of which, performance anxiety. What's going on for you at an emotional level? So what are the emotions that you're having, feeling? Is it stress? Is it awkwardness? Is it distress? What is it? And then the next level is cognitive. So what are you actually thinking? I don't want to do this. This might go bad. I'm not good enough. Those sorts of things. And sorry, that last point, I'm not good enough, that is a story. So what's the narrative? What are the stories that you're telling yourself when you're avoiding a difficult conversation? So, this obviously applies to all of life. For the purposes of today, obviously we're talking about in organisational settings, but I do think that the things that we talk about today are useful in just about any setting. And certainly I've tried to use them at home with children and in relationships, because even though I am running a webinar about having difficult conversations, certainly doesn't mean that I'm an expert or good at them. They are hard, and that is just a reality. All right, so before we were talking about how we felt when we thought about something that was difficult. So now what I want you to do is actually just stop for a moment and think about this idea of productive. So when you think about something being productive, what are you thinking? What comes into your mind? What are the words that you hear yourself saying? Pop them in the chat for us. I'm interested to see what people think. So when I think about something being productive versus something being difficult, thanks, Joe, outcomes, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. So when I think about something being difficult, you sort of pull away from it, you recoil because it's hard. Whereas when you think about something being productive, I don't know about you, but I actually get a sense of excitement about that, a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of something that can be achieved. And that's really why we're here. That's what we want to do, is we want to turn these challenging, difficult conversations into ones that we want to have for all sorts of different reasons. So we're going to talk about some of the benefits of being able to have these productive conversations. And then we're going to talk about some of the consequences of not having them, just to kind of, ram home why this is so important. So these are actual whiteboard notes from a combination of clients and workshops that I've run over the past couple of years. So these are the things that come up for people when they say, when we ask them, what are the benefits of having these hard conversations? And so they say things like, I'll feel less anxious, I won't be constantly overthinking, less self-talk, win-win, thanks, Christine, less feelings of stress. They might actually be enjoyable. And I'm going to come back to that because it's actually really, really important point. Some of the other things, less time wasting. It's going to be empowering. Everyone's on the same page, heading in the same direction. Thanks, Murray. You achieve a useful outcome or a solution or just progress, and that's what we're aiming for. I love that expression as a hopefully reformed perfectionist, this idea of progress, not perfection. That's all we're looking for. It deepens understanding and clarity. That's to your point, Murray. Relief is something that comes up very often. Relationships can be strengthened, and to your point, I think it was Christine that said, enjoyable. Indeed, because when we grapple with things with people, when we grapple with hard things, it definitely. Sorry, Kate, that was you that said enjoyable. It does strengthen relationships. It actually builds connection. And we know that highly connected teams tend to have better performance. I think the other thing that's really important is that as leaders, when you lean into having these conversations and you do them really well, you're actually role modeling this growth mindset that we need. And I'd argue that, it's a responsibility as a participant in an organisation that you lean into these sorts of things. Certainly if you have a desire to be high performing, high achieving and successful. not to mention wanting to hang on to your staff, your employees at a time like this. Collaborative is another one. Thanks, Leanne. So then the consequences of avoiding conversations, I mean, these really are, some of these you could, put straight on the bottom line. Productivity, anxiety, stress, things fester, relationships break down. There's interpersonal, relational impact. It creates mistrust and suspicion. Again, these are the things that have come up in workshops that I've run with teams along about this whole area. People get suspicious and then they start making up their own stories. With a little bit or no information, people will fill in the gaps. It's how our brains work. We think so much faster than we can speak, and so we fill in the gaps. And when we don't address things, what else does it do? It actually sends the wrong message. It says that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. David Morrison, I think he's a lieutenant general, retired from the ADF force, and he actually only said that very recently. And it is about that. If you don't deal with things, you're saying that it's okay. I think this is another really important thing around mental load. So at a time when, certainly every single client that I work with, no one is sitting there saying, I've got time on my hands. Everyone's, exhausted, and also we're coming up to the end of the year, and there really is that very heavy kind of mental load. And what you want to try and do is avoid things that add to that. And this is one way that you can reduce some of that. The other thing that I think that's really important is this whole piece around development. If you don't have these feedback conversations, you're actually not upholding your responsibility as a leader, which is to develop other leaders. And I think I mentioned this whole idea of, accepting standards. I know it's a great quote, isn't it? Thanks, Jo. So I want to talk about this whole idea of, as you set your intentions around having a difficult conversation with one, how you land your messaging. And this is what we're trying to achieve, is that we want to be able to have a conversation with someone. And part of that conversation is going to be you listening. So that when we get to the end of what we are wanting to get across, that person has not gone into fight or flight mode and disappeared and isn't hearing anything else you say. So how do you land your message, ensuring that the person is still listening when you have finished speaking? Now, when I say speaking, I'm not saying you just, create a meeting and stand and deliver. I'm talking about a conversation. And so through that conversation, how do you make sure this person is still receptive? So let's talk about some tiny tweaks that have some really big impact. All right. These are really, really simple, and I'm just going to run through the concepts and give you some examples along the way, and some time to ask questions at the end. So this first concept is around permission questions. Now, again, just think of all of this in the context of increasing receptivity, right? So, the opposite of creating defensiveness. Permission questions are exactly that, asking for permission. So some examples of this might be, would you mind if I asked you a question about something? Would it be okay if I ran something by you? Can we have a conversation about something? Have you got a minute? I want to talk to you about something. May I ask you your advice about something? As you can see, this is not, highly complex, but this is different to sometimes what we've seen in terms of people giving feedback, is that they haven't done the preparation and they just react, and something will come out like, I've got a problem with you on this, or when you did this, this happened. And we've actually got to step back from that and actually invite people into that space first, because if we don't, we're almost taking them by surprise, and that's when people get defensive and react. So the second one is, and I love this one, replacing but with and at the same time. Now, if you think about the word but, when you use but in a sentence, it's very oppositional. It almost negates everything that you've said before the word but. Whereas if you use and at the same time, you're actually creating much more of a collaborative, solutions-oriented phraseology, and it it does increase receptivity. So some examples of that. Obviously, I've got a marketing background and I work with some agencies, and this is one example for them. You know, we've received this new brief, but we're on deadline with another one. We're absolutely snowed, right? So it's just all problem. So if you think about that in this different context, is can we chat about that new brief? There's your permission question. And then I want to walk through ways we can ensure we meet the deadline and at the same time deliver on the big pitch we're working on. So you can just see how different that feels. Once you see this, my experience of this is that you'll just start using it all the time. You'll use it in everything, not even difficult conversations. It's just a more open way of communicating. Concept 3, and that was my son Jimmy's choice for the image for this picture. Ask for advice, not opinions. There are whole PhDs written about this. The absolute expert on this is a guy called Robert Cialdini, and if you work in marketing or advertising, you will, or sales probably, you will have come across him. He is the master of all things to do with influence. And there is a whole lot of science around what happens when you ask people for their opinion versus when you ask people for their ask them for their advice. So opinions, again, it creates that step back. It's like, why do you want my opinion? Are you going to hold it against me? And as we know, opinions can differ, and you just have to, I guess, consider the purpose of opinion columns and opinion writers in the media and the reasons that they do that, because it's polarizing. Whereas if you ask someone for advice, one, you're sort of deferring respectfully to their expertise and their experience, but also it's inviting them in. You know, people love being asked for advice. And it's much more collaborative. It's like, I'm really interested in what you have to offer in this scenario. So the fourth concept around language is this notion of pre-framing. And this again is from Robert Cialdini. Pre-framing is the practice of getting people sympathetic to your message before they experience it. Now, there's a caveat with this, and it's on the next slide, but the caveat is use this for good, not evil. Now, when I show you this first example, who in this room has ever met a guru? Now, you can imagine, you know, in some sort of cult-like setting where that might be a manipulative example. But there is obviously value in helping people be receptive to your idea before you. And part of that is using your discretion as a leader as to how you use your influencing skills. You know, so who wants more time in your day? Can I introduce you to someone that would change your life? You know, you can see how some of those things might be very salesy, and that, you know, that's okay. All I'm saying is just use your discretion. And a good example here is, you know, would you be interested in an idea that will help manage workload as well as develop staff? Now that conversation is going to lead into something, but you'll see why that's a good way of phrasing something. So they're the language sort of tweaks that I mentioned. But the fifth thing that I really wanted to talk about is Stephen Covey's idea of seeking first to understand and then to be understood. And this is really about listening. It's about your intentions. And I think the important thing is that when you do more ask and less tell, you actually create psychological safety. And psychological safety is where these conversations happen naturally. So the impact of that mindset around seeking to understand before you seek to be understood is that you're building trust because you're listening. You know, people feel heard. Everyone wants to be heard. You're creating a situation of empathy. You're showing that you've got the ability to take different perspectives, and that's another key leadership capability. The other thing it does when you listen like that is it gives you clues on how to communicate with different people. Most of us will have experience in our day-to-day life that, you know, most people listen with the intent to reply. They're just waiting for the space to actually say what they think. They're not fully listening. And, you know, that's something that we all have to work on, I think. You know, the guru, he probably hate me using that term for him, but he's the expert, is Oscar Trimboli, which some of you will have had some exposure to. And he has just launched his book called How to Listen, and I thoroughly recommend it. But, you know, when we listen with this latter intention, it's about mutual understanding. And again, It's that understanding, that openness to diverse views that helps us, get to those learning edges, the places where we have to innovate and come up with creative solutions. So more ask, less tell. So when you bring those things together, it can look something like this. Now, work with me here. This is all for example, and it really does come down to you practicing these things in your own style. But for example, here's how something might roll. Do you have some time for me to run something by you? There's your permission question. I've got an idea. Would you be interested to hear this idea about managing workload and developing team members? I know how important it is to deliver for our clients and at the same time support the well-being and development of our people so that we can retain them. So that's a sort of example of how that might flow. So I want to talk to the point of what you do with this information now, and we can make it available to you. Firstly, I just want you to, and I'm not going to be able to see you do this, and normally this is in a face-to-face workshop or a much smaller group, but if you just, in your seats, just cross your arms as you normally do and see what that feels like. So that's your natural arms crossed position. You did not have to think about it. If you look down and notice which arm you have on top, and now I want you to swap them over. And some of you will be physical geniuses and very dexterous and be able to do this. But for those of us that aren't, you'll notice that it's actually, I can't even do it. It's just so unnatural for me to do it the other way. If you did that 3 times a day, every day for, 21 days or whatever the science says, it would just be a habit and you'd be able to do it really, really easily and really naturally. Now, my point for that is that, like anything you want to do well, you have to practice it. And these concepts for some of us will be new. And if you want to get good at them, you need to practice them. You want them to be second nature. You want them to become, in that the theory of competence, we go from being unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent, which is probably where where I found myself when I first started looking into this whole area. Then going to conscious competence and then unconscious competence. We just do it second nature. That's what we're aiming for. So your new friends in this whole area are just like any other part of your life. If you want to be good at it, you need practice and preparation. And the practice part, I would really encourage you to find some allies, find some people in your organisation that you are happy learning with, because they're the sorts of people that will really help you make the most of these things. And they are really, really important parts of the leadership toolkit. And when you role model it, when you, as the cultural architect of your organisation or your team, when you do this, you then role model to others and they will learn from you, and you want them to. So the other last point I want to make here is about your motivation for having the conversation in the first place. And, this is delicate because often in my experience, I've observed that sometimes people want to have these conversations because they think they're right and they want to win. And I would say if that's your mindset, don't have the conversation. You need to step back from that until you've got some perspective around a constructive approach that isn't about power or dominance. Because when you do that, if you go in with that mindset, you will send that person into fight or flight mode. It won't be a productive outcome, and you will end up probably having to deal with subsequent issues. Once you've decided you're really clear on your intentions and that they are productive, think about what's happening for you in your body. Feel it, or what will be happening for you in your body. Think about, visualize what will happen when you go to have this conversation. How are you going to feel in your body? What emotions will you be experiencing? What will you be thinking and what will you be telling yourself? And it's really important that you get familiar with how you think you're going to respond in these situations. And the reason that that's important is because they're the sorts of things that can really derail you in the moment. You want to know and be prepared for the things that are going to come up for you in those situations, because you want to be able to stay clear, stay listening, stay present in order to really build those connections with the person that you're having whatever difficult conversation it is. So take the time, set your intentions, visualize how it's going to feel in your body, emotionally, in your head, and then prepare using your language that we've talked about today, the language that increases receptivity and collaboration. And I think the other thing too is, we want outcomes. That's why we want to have productive conversations. And I think it's important that we consider that if we're going to approach these conversations with a mindset of listening and learning, that at the same time, we also should be open to compromise. That, we don't have all the answers. The whole beauty and point of collaboration is to deliver a better outcome than the one that we can think of on our own. So that is pretty much where I will leave it today. I've got a couple of final sort of quotes for you, which is, these are the tough situations that remind us of our imperfections, and it's our imperfections that bring us together. That is actually how we connect. We don't connect over people being perfect. And I'm very much drawing on, oh my God, his name's just disappeared out of my head. That's terrible. Ben Crow, sorry. When you traverse these tricky things with another human, it does actually bring you closer together. And I love this this quote about firing together and wiring together, because that's what happens when you have teams that can have high rigor, robust debates that aren't personal because they've learned how to do them well. That's where you get ultimate performance. So I will leave it there and open up for any questions if anyone has any. If you want to contact me for any of the concepts or some worksheets that I have that make this easier, please do so. That's my email address there. And Jo, I might hand back to you now and open it up for any questions. Thanks, everyone.
All right, that was fantastic, Kamm. Thank you so much for giving us so much value. I'm sure the audience has been taking notes. There was a lot in there. So you'll be able to share that information with the audience if they reach out to you. Yeah, fantastic. We've got someone here. I think Nadine Porter hasn't come up on the actual chat, but she's saying this. She concurs, collaboration is to deliver a better outcome than the one we came up with on our own. Really powerful. So my question is, what's one key thing that we should do first? Like, what's the first step?
I will always, in any interpersonal situation, which is what teams are, always come back to self-awareness. What is my role in what's going on here? What is my part of the situation? Because I don't think we can responsibly act unless we understand that or have reflected on it. I mean, we're not going to understand necessarily someone else's perceptions, but it's important that we reflect on and take ownership of what we think our part in the mess, that's what we call it. What's our part in this situation? What have we contributed? What am I doing when the team's at its worst? What am I doing when the team's at its best? I will always come back to that first.
I love that. So it's what you can control, not trying to control others and how they behave and what they say, what they do. I'm just going to come up with a few quotes. People are saying it really resonates. The whole team on the call are going to practice this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that makes me so happy. I mean, it's a hard topic and it's sometimes heavy, and at the same time, you can see how, the energy, my whole body changed there. And when I went, that phrase, it does. It makes things easy. It's actually exciting because it's about possibilities. And you just look around at every organization and every business and every team, and everyone's challenged. And, we need different ways of doing things. The old ways just don't cut it anymore. And they're going to hold us to account on behaviors. They really are. There's just too much information and too much evidence around for people to not be accountable for this stuff.
Exactly. Murray, great lessons. Mark is saying great session. Lovely. And we've got Murray saying, can I get some forms and more info on this? Murray, okay. We'll send it to you.
so that you can just copy down my email address there. That's probably easiest.
Yeah. Let me just add that back to the stream. There we go.
That'll be easier because I didn't quite get to take your email address down then, Murray.
Yeah, I didn't really want everyone to spam you, Murray, so that's why I took that off. So yeah, it's probably best for you to email Kamm and anyone else here on the session as well. If you're looking for more information, get in touch with Kamm. This was so invaluable, and it's recorded, so you can go back and go through the lessons that Kamm takes you through. Any further questions from the audience? Let's see, we'll give it a few moments. So I had the pleasure of meeting Kamm. How long ago was it? A few months ago now.
Yes, in that pub in Melbourne. You actually got to meet my son, me actually.
I did, yes. Yeah, exactly. It was wonderful. So yeah, it's great to see you in action. What we've got Michael asking a question. What would you recommend if you're having a conversation with someone who's focused on winning over actual discussion?
Yeah,
great question.
Really good question. Two things is, I think you, if that's something that you're sure about, I would probably defer having the conversation for a little while. See if their winning is coming from a place of reaction, and perhaps give them some time and space to, calm down, get themselves back in check. The other thing too is, ask questions. What's going on for you? What's going on for you about this? I think that's an important one too. The other thing I'd say is if you started the conversation, I think it's perfectly okay to say, hey, maybe we should regroup on this at another time.
That's a powerful way.
I think it's really important because what you're doing then is you're acknowledging that you can read something that's getting uncomfortable for someone, and you're saying it's okay and we don't have to do this now. I think it's important.
Excellent. And then Christine just mentioned, yep, great question. And a great answer that you've given as well.
If the other question for someone in that situation is what's the outcome that you would like to achieve here? Because it gives them a moment to actually stop and think about what it is that they want to do rather than reacting, which is probably where winning is coming from, because that's a defensive fight response, really. So what's the outcome you'd like to achieve?
And the biggest thing is it's not a personal vendetta. It's not just you wanting to do it to the personal gain, you wanting to do it so everyone can benefit. And difficult conversations, it shouldn't have the negative connotations. It should be a case of, if we have a respectful, collaborative working relationship, we should be able to call out and say, hey, this is what's happening here. This is how I think we can change things moving forward. So it's empowering to be able to do that and to really work through stuff and become more innovative in our approach to doing things. And that's what makes it more fun.
And I think, the teams that I've seen that do this really well, they've actually spent a lot of time working on how they do this. They've actually acknowledged that they work on themselves as a team. They work on the work that they do, not the technical work. They work on how they work together as a team. They work on, okay, what language will we use to challenge the status quo? And it's things like, can I play devil's advocate here? Oh, would you mind if I offer a perspective? So that it's not like, well, I disagree with you. It's very different energy. It creates a different response.
Yeah, and Lexi's saying it should be just like any other conversation. Totally, 100% on that. Yeah.
And I think, I put it out to everyone here is that, let's all try and treat it like that. Get good at it, practice it, practice that muscle.
That's it. I think, that was
okay for other people in your team to practice it. Another really good way to encourage people to challenge is to, we call it in the world of psychological safety, assigning dissent. So if you want to encourage a team to interrogate things more, not interrogate people, but interrogate ideas more, start off a session with, right, here's this idea. I want everyone to pick it to pieces. Give everyone permission. You'll be amazed what you come up with. And you can get everyone to play a different role. Okay, everyone now build on this idea. You see what I'm doing there? It's about creating permission around specific behaviours.
There's a couple of things in that. The first thing you mentioned, just like with everything, if you want to get good at something, you've got to practice it. You can't just arrive and be, have that readiness to have that conversation. You've got to, really think that through. And the innovation piece that you just mentioned now, it's almost like, every business should have an innovation box, giving everyone permission to put in their idea and to go, hey, let's pick one out. Let's discuss this. Let's workshop it. That would be such a fun working environment, and you get so much out of it. It would be so invaluable.
Yeah. I mean, when I sort of in my mind picture those teams that have really rigorous debate, but it's none of it's personal. It doesn't mean there won't be personal things. Of course there will. We're humans. We're not robots. But it's and I've had these experiences. I spent 15 years at News Corp, and people have, some very strongly held opinions about News Corp, as many of the journalists in News Corp have about other things. However, that is one of the most interesting places in terms of robust debate. And I remember when I moved from a community division to a metro division, and I didn't understand the relational dynamics and the things that I observed, I was like, wow, this is terrifying me. But then I realized, actually, no, they had this down to a fine art. They could have robust debate, but it wasn't personal. It was in the interest of moving things forward. But you have to practice it.
Exactly. So Leanne's saying, I love the idea of giving permission on ideas. And Michael's saying, thank you for the great tips. And on behalf of everyone, I want to say thank you as well. This has been an epic session. Once again, I will just add the contact information for Kamm on the screen here. Connect with her on LinkedIn and follow up with any questions that you might have that you haven't asked here. There's still 30 seconds left of time, or 3 minutes left of time if you had that one pressing question. But if not, feel free to ask Kamm when you reach out to her.
I think you can tell it's a subject area that I'm very passionate about. So I'm more than happy to chat with anyone. Please just reach out.
This has been wonderful. So that's it for today, folks. So how to have those difficult conversations and achieve those positive outcomes. Thank you so much once again, Kamm, for your invaluable insights and expertise. We really appreciate you. We're very grateful for this session. So much value you've given. So final words.
Practice, experiment. Don't worry about getting it perfect. You just practice it. Just start doing it. It's give yourself space to fail, because that's ultimately, what we're trying to do is just get better at something that's hard.
Excellent. That's wonderful. So everyone, we're going to end it there. Enjoy your day and week ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.